Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Florida-based jazz composer and bandleader Chuck Owen. He celebrates the 25th anniversary of his Grammy-nominated big band, the Jazz Surge, with a new 2021 album called Within Us, done with his 19-piece big band with special guest vibraphonist Warren Wolf. Chuck has been a revered composer, bandleader, and educator for over 40 years. Enjoy the story.
Hey, Chuck, hey, thanks for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I'm delighted to do it.
So let's talk about, you're celebrating 25 years with the Jazz Surge, and you have a new album, Within Us. And, you know, it's coming out during a time where, you know, we're coming out of a global pandemic. Lots of things have been very strange in the world of recorded music and even in the world. How does this feel for you to have this out right now?
Well, in the first place, the process of making the album, of recording the album, just was an amazing feeling. I mean, I'm not sure that I or many of the other musicians have ever experienced much of anything like it. I had been fortunate enough to be over in Germany working with WDR and recording project about a month before we recorded this, so I at least had the experience of being with people actually in a room and recording music, but that was the first time I had done it in a year and a half. And I think for almost everybody in the band, it was the first time they had been together for, you know, close to 2 years. And just even before we played a note, the sense of kind of camaraderie, because, you know, this is pretty much, it's been a pretty stable band for a long time. And so the sense of community coming back together and actually knowing we were going to make music felt great. But then ever since then, it's been wonderful, too. We were fortunate enough to be able to play up at Birdland in September and kind of do a CD release party, and that was just, you know, just a terrific time. He kind of expanded the community from the band to the audience. Now the audience was a part of this. Yeah, I'm going to guess 95% of them hadn't been in a club or hadn't heard live music in the whole time either. So it's been, you know, for all the struggle we've been through in these last year and a half, there's been some payoffs at the end, and I think we've learned to truly value and appreciate what we maybe have taken for granted.
So what are you hoping the listener, the downloader of this album gets from this experience ultimately?
That's individual. I always have a kind of a concept in mind. Interestingly enough, on this album, the concept kind of shifted a little bit in midstream due to COVID and due to this kind of loss of community and all of a sudden recognizing the value of it. But I never want to, as much as I try and like in liner notes and everything like that, try and give the listener maybe a clue of what to listen for and what maybe kind of dominated my thinking. I'm really happy for them to take away whatever they want to take away from it. To me, that's the experience of art, is that you use your own lens and you have your own perspective on what it is. I can just put out there what I value, and I hope other people value it too.
So, you know, kind of as a culmination of what we've gone through with this lockdown, you know, there's been a lot of self-reflective time. What did you maybe learn about yourself that you didn't realize before that's going to make you stronger as you promote a new album and get back to the live arena?
Again, I think it has to do with community. I think how much I value and lean on the other musicians involved with this. It's not that I didn't appreciate that before. I just felt the loss so much more dramatically than I would have expected during COVID. Jazz music is something that as a composer, you know, putting those notes on a piece of paper really don't mean much until the musicians realize it. And in jazz, they realize it in their own very personal ways. And that's something that really came out of this, is the value of that and the beauty in that, and hearing all these people getting to kind of express themselves through my music again. I think I'd say that's probably what I kind of gravitated towards.
Talk to me a little bit about your childhood, where you were born and raised, and how, you know, music has become your life.
Yeah, I was born in Virginia, but I only lived 6 years there, and so I don't really remember that. I was raised in Omaha, so not too far from you guys. Actually, you know, I think you kind of hear some of the wide open spaces. You know, we used to get the wind that basically started in Denver, landed in Omaha. And so my previous album was kind of reminisces about that, or the whole notion of wind. You know, I don't know. I think then I moved to Cincinnati following that, went to school in Texas, and then went to grad school out in LA. I've been fortunate enough to live all over the place, and I've learned to kind of value things about every place. I think the one thing that has stayed with me, and certainly you can hear in my music, is my love and appreciation for the natural environment. One of the albums I did was about rivers, American rivers, and particularly river rafting trips that I've done. More and more I've gravitated towards hiking, and I have a place in the mountains in North Carolina that I go to write a lot of this. So I think the environmental aspect, you can kind of hear almost dripping through all of my music.
It's interesting you mentioned when today in Kansas City, it's like a meteorological event. They said last night.
Is it really?
They were like, it sounded like they were saying a hurricane was coming through. They're like, the winds tomorrow are going to be crazy. So yeah, it's whipping everybody around like crazy. And it's like usually not like this, so it's weird.
What's funny is that when I go out, and I don't have many in Florida, we certainly don't get them unless it's a thunderstorm, and then I'm usually not out of it. But and occasionally I get it in the mountains. But the wind was such a pervasive part of growing up in Omaha that when I get around it like a breezy day, when it's like 25, 35 mile an hour, kind of steady winds and all that, it just feels great. I just love it. It takes me back to such a peaceful time, without even thinking about it. It's amazing how those kind of triggers that, from your earlier life, kind of manifest later on.
Yeah, definitely the environment you're in is huge. I mean, I'm looking forward to today. I'm going to ride my bike still. I'm ready to tackle it. I'm a bike rider.
There you go.
So I'm like,
yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, why not? So who were some of your earlier musical influences, or maybe like the first jazz show you ever saw that really made you think this is what you want to do with your life?
Man, I get asked that so many times. I never know what to answer to that because I was such a late bloomer. I kind of went into my first year in college was even as a pre-med. Actually, it was really more kind of biology with the idea of maybe going into forestry and that sort of stuff. But I went into music as a sophomore year, and I got down to North Texas, and I realized that all these other kids, they had been listening to jazz their entire life. They'd gone to Stan Kenton camps and all that sort of thing. I had done none of that. So I got to North Texas, and that experience right there was, I had played instruments enough to know that I really loved being in band programs. I had written music for a jazz band that is mostly kind of gravitating towards, in those days, what was kind of jazz rock, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Cold Blood, Chicago, those sorts of groups. I really didn't understand jazz. So when I was in North Texas, it was just kind of the heavens opened, and I got exposed to all sorts of stuff. But I was there, and this is, I have mentioned this before, and I've been thinking about it recently, particularly since he just passed away. I was there just a year or two after Lyle Mays got to North Texas, and they were starting to play his music a lot with the big bands. And while I had heard big bands, I don't know that I'd actually heard like the Kenton Band yet, but I certainly heard them a lot. My roommate, on the road with them, the Basie Band. I mean, I got to hear a bunch of the kind of the classic big bands of the day, Buddy Rich's band, Maynard Ferguson's, Woody Herman's. I got to go out to hear all those, and all of them I just loved. But Lyle was doing stuff with writing for the band that combined a much more contemporary music along with a very classical music focus. And I'd been involved with classical music. I also loved pop music and folk music and rock. And so I loved the fact that somehow there was a pathway to combine all those interests rather than just trying to kind of go down the same path that, people have been doing with the Basie Band or Thad Jones or whatever. So that really opened my eyes to the possibilities, and kind of from then on I was kind of hooked as a writer.
Talk to me a little bit about, you've been around a lot of big, heavy jazz cats in your life. What did you learn from them that you in turn have used to teach younger players that you get around?
Most of it doesn't have to do with music, honestly. It has to do with being a good person and recognizing that this is a business, and that there are a lot of talented musicians out there, and people just don't have time for folks that are self-obsessed, that are late and, can't take care of business, and it just aren't fun to be around. I mean, everybody, and that shows up in group dynamics too. If you're playing in a band that everybody gets along with and everybody loves being around, you can just hear that in a group, and you can also hear the tension and the stridency when all of a sudden there are folks that have been kind of forced to play together that really don't like each other. And so there's so many musical things to talk about, but I think in terms of the one thing I may not have snapped to instantly and that has become apparent and dominates, boy, you start working with some of the very best musicians out there, and they're almost all a joy to work with, and they take care of business.
Talk to me, if you have a dream tonight and you run into your younger self and you have to give your younger self advice based on what you've learned throughout all these years, what would it be?
I feel like I kind of lucked into the right approach, but hang in there. Don't be discouraged by the left turns or by the obstacles that you find in your way. I mean, if there's one thing, I guess I was maybe a little bit timid as a younger musician and person, and I've learned to really love talking to people, being with people. But I think the biggest thing is, in this world, in this business, you're going to hear no an awful lot. And you're going to have a lot of obstacles thrown in your way. And you just have to develop this kind of tough exterior and to kind of get past those, what could be perceived as slights or, however you want to look at it. They're going to come, and you just keep plowing ahead, and don't let it daunt you. For the most part, I think I've followed that, even though I didn't know I was doing that, but there have certainly been moments where probably I could have used a pick-me-up from my later self.
Right on. Well, I'm going to have one more COVID question here, and it's this.
Okay.
When we all do kind of return in earnest to the live stage, what do you hope we realize about the power of live music?
I think it goes back to some of the early responses that I gave, is that I've just become more convinced than ever is that there is power in live music, and there's just something you can't get from having those earbuds on. It has to do with the community of kind of touching base with the musicians themselves, experiencing something, particularly in jazz, that's in the moment, and that would never be recreated again. There's just a vibrancy in that. There's a feeling of being alive in that I think we can forget about really quickly when we're away from it. And all you have to do is touch base with it again. It's like, oh my gosh, I really miss this. And I hope people don't forget about it enough so that they stay away. I hope they come back in droves when we're able to in a safe manner.
So everything's going to come down to this. Everyone has a perception or an idea of who they think you are. Your family, your friends, your fans, your students. But ultimately, you live your life. You have a perception of yourself. Who do you think you are?
Wow, that's a great question. I think I'm pretty much what you see. I'm a pretty simple guy in a way. I guess it comes back to my Midwest root. I'm an incredibly family-oriented person. I love simple things, playing games, being outside, and that sort of thing, being in the environment. And I think all of that comes through my music. I'm not sure people always recognize or trust that. They kind of tend to think that there are other things there, but I think I'm pretty much what you see is what you get.
Right on. Chuck, thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz. Good luck with the album and the return to the stage, man. I appreciate it.
I thank you very much.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Florida, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Chuck for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at YouTube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.